Chapter 1. The arrival. Veruca Salt had always lived her life in the lap of luxury, where whatever she wanted, she got. Her life was tailored to her every desire, or so she thought. It came as a complete shock when her mother, Mrs. Salt, announced that Veruca would be going to summer camp. Veruca was horrified at the idea. "I don't want to go." Veruca stamped her foot, her face red with indignation. "I don't care if it's summer camp, winter camp, or whatever, I'm not going." "Darling," her mother replied in her crisp, polished tone, "you need to learn some discipline, meet new friends, and get away from those screens and sweets for a while. It'll be good for you." Veruca narrowed her eyes. "You can't make me. Oh, I can, and I will." Her mother's tone had finality, one that Veruca wasn't used to hearing. Within days, Veruca found herself unceremoniously packed up and shipped off to Camp Rockwall. MRS. Salt waved goodbye from the car window as Veruca was practically dragged up to the entrance, a look of sheer fury etched on her face. "I'll never forgive you for this, Mother," she shouted. As the car pulled away, Veruca turned and looked at the camp, rolling her eyes at the rustic cabins, the towering trees, and the smell of something outdoorsy. "Disgusting," she muttered to herself. The camp was nothing like the luxury resorts she was used to. No spa treatments, no room service, and worst of all, no Wi-Fi. What kind of place was this? As Veruca begrudgingly walked toward the camp admin office, she heard music blasting from inside, the unmistakable riff of an electric guitar. It sounded familiar. Curious but still fuming, Veruca pushed open the door, and her jaw dropped. Standing behind the admin desk was none other than the band Fall Out Boy. Pete Wentz was fiddling with some paperwork, Patrick Stump was talking on the phone, and Joe Troman and Andy Hurley were in the corner, debating over camp schedules. Veruca blinked twice. "Is this a joke?" Pete Wentz looked up from his clipboard and gave a small smile. "Hey, welcome to Camp Rockwall. You must be Veruca Salt. Your mom mentioned you'd be a special case dart." Veruca was about to throw one of her infamous tantrums, but something about the whole situation stopped her. Why on earth was Fall Out Boy running a summer camp? She had so many questions, but all she managed to say was, "I want to go home." "Yeah, that's not happening," Patrick said casually as he hung up the phone. "You're stuck with us for the next few weeks," Veruca huffed, crossing her arms. "I don't belong here." "Do you know who I am?" "Sure," said Pete. "You're Veruca Salt. But here at camp, you're just another camper." Before she could protest, the door burst open, and a girl around Veruca's age bounced in, her energy contagious. She had wild, curly brown hair and was dressed in a camp t-shirt and shorts, her cheeks flushed from what seemed like hours of outdoor activity. "Hey, I'm Emily," she said with a wide grin. "You're new, right? I'm your cabin mate. It's going to be so fun." Veruca eyed Emily warily, clearly unimpressed. "Fun?" she repeated. "This place looks like a prison." Emily laughed, not bothered by Veruca's attitude. "You just haven't given it a chance yet. Trust me, it gets better. The lake is amazing, and the campfire nights? The best." "I doubt that," Veruca muttered under her breath. Pete Wentz cleared his throat. "Veruca, I think you're gonna find this camp has more in store for you than you expect. Why don't you go settle into your cabin with Emily, and we'll catch up later." Emily grabbed Veruca's arm and dragged her outside before she could protest. As they walked toward the cabin, Emily chatted excitedly about camp activities, the pranks they pulled on counselors, and the upcoming talent show that the entire camp was hyped about. Veruca, meanwhile, was mentally calculating how long it would take to sabotage the entire camp experience and get sent home early. But as she spent more time with Emily, something unexpected started to happen. Emily wasn't like the other kids Veruca knew. She didn't care about fancy clothes or who had the newest phone. She was carefree, goofy, and, above all, kind. Despite herself, Veruca found that being around Emily wasn't so bad. Sure, the camp was gross, the food was terrible, and there wasn't a proper bubble bath for miles, but Emily made her laugh. And the camp staff, aka Fall Out Boy, weren't as clueless as Veruca had assumed. They actually ran the place surprisingly well, organizing epic scavenger hunts and giving hilarious music lessons. Days turned into weeks, and as much as Veruca hated to admit it, she was having fun. The final night of camp arrived, and everyone gathered around the campfire. Patrick played the guitar while Pete told ghost stories, and Emily whispered jokes in Veruca's ear, making her giggle uncontrollably. For the first time in a long time, Veruca didn't feel the need to demand anything. She had everything she needed right there, a friend, a sense of adventure, and a summer she'd never forget. As the campfire flickered in the dark, Emily nudged Veruca and whispered, "So, are you glad your mom made you come here?" Veruca hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe. But don't tell her that." The two girls laughed as the stars twinkled above, and Veruca realized that maybe, just maybe, summer camp wasn't the worst thing after all. And who would have thought? It took a rock band and a new friend to show her chapter 2. The first day Veruca woke up the next morning in a haze of frustration. She lay in her bunk bed, glaring up at the wooden ceiling of the cabin. The early morning sunlight streamed through the window, and she could hear the faint chirping of birds outside. Emily, her overly chipper cabin mate, was already awake, humming a tune as she pulled on her camp t-shirt and shorts. Veruca groaned, throwing her blanket over her head. How is it even possible to be so happy this early? Emily peeked over the side of her bed. Oh, come on, Veruca. It's the first full day of camp. We've got archery, swimming, and we're even learning how to make friendship bracelets. It's going to be amazing. Veruca dramatically rolled her eyes under the blanket. Friendship bracelets? Really? She couldn't care less about tying knots in strings or shooting arrows. I don't even like swimming, she mumbled, her voice muffled. Emily hopped down from her bunk and pulled the blanket off Veruca. You can't stay in bed all day. You'll miss breakfast, and rumor has it the band is cooking pancakes this morning. Veruca, despite her annoyance, was intrigued. Fall Out Boy making pancakes? That was bizarre enough to get her out of bed. With a sigh of defeat, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and slowly got dressed. The camp clothes were basic and uncomfortable, a far cry from the designer outfits she was used to. She tied her hair into a tight ponytail and followed Emily out of the cabin, feeling like a fish out of water. As they walked down the dirt path toward the mess hall, Veruca's face twisted with distaste. The place smelled of damp trees and earth. Her perfectly polished shoes were already getting scuffed by the rocky terrain. I still don't get why my mom thought sending me here was a good idea, she muttered. Emily glanced at her sympathetically. Maybe she wanted you to try something new. Camp isn't so bad once you get used to it. You might even, dare I say it, have fun. Veruca shot her a withering look, but Emily just grinned and skipped ahead. Inside the mess hall, the campers were already gathered around the long wooden tables, laughing and chatting over breakfast. Veruca surveyed the scene, unimpressed. She wasn't used to communal meals, especially not in a place where everything looked so unpolished. As they walked toward the serving station, she spotted Pete Wentz behind the counter, flipping pancakes on a massive griddle. Patrick Stump was stirring a vat of syrup, while Joe and Andy handed out plates. Morning, Veruca, Pete called cheerfully. You ready for your first day of camp? Veruca crossed her arms. I suppose this is your way of making me feel better about being stuck here, Pete smirked. Something like that. Pancake, Veruca sighed, accepting a plate. She'd never admit it, but the pancake actually looked pretty good. Fine, she muttered, grabbing a fork. Emily nudged her as they sat down at a table with a few other girls. See? It's not so bad. The pancakes are legendary here. Veruca took a cautious bite, and to her surprise, it was delicious. She quickly polished off her plate, even though she made sure to maintain a look of indifference the whole time. No way was she going to let anyone know she was enjoying it. As breakfast ended, Pete stood in front of the group and clapped his hands. Alright, campers. Today's your first official day, and we've got a lot of activities planned. Check your schedules, and we'll see you all out there. Remember, no fun unless you want to. The campers erupted into cheers, and Emily grabbed Veruca's arm excitedly. We have archery first. Come on, Veruca groaned again but reluctantly followed Emily to the archery range. It was a clearing in the woods with targets set up at varying distances. The camp instructor, Joe Truman, was already waiting, wearing a ridiculous feathered cap as if he were some kind of modern-day Robin Hood. Alright, Archers Joe announced, clapping his hands. Time to see if any of you can hit a bullseye without shooting your own foot. Grab a bow and get ready. Veruca scowled as she picked up a bow, awkwardly holding it in her hands. This was definitely not her thing. Meanwhile, Emily eagerly grabbed an arrow and positioned herself at the target, looking like she had done this 1,000 times before. Veruca tried to mimic her, fumbling with the bowstring. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath. She pulled back on the string, but before she could let the arrow fly, it slipped out of her hand and dropped straight to the ground. Emily burst into laughter, quickly stifling it when Veruca shot her a glare. "It's okay. Just takes some practice." Veruca grumbled, trying again. This time, the arrow flew sort of. It wobbled in the air before landing pitifully just a few feet away. Joe sauntered over, raising an eyebrow. "Well, not everyone's a natural. You'll get there, Veruca." Veruca's frustration was mounting. She hated being bad at anything. "Maybe I just won't do archery," she snapped, tossing the bow aside. Emily gave her an encouraging smile. "Hey, don't worry about it. You'll get better. Plus, next is swimming, and that's always fun." Veruca wrinkled her nose. "I told you, I don't like swimming." Emily shrugged. "You might surprise yourself." By the time they reached the lake, Veruca's mood was a mix of irritation and exhaustion. The sun reflected off the water, making the whole place look like a postcard. But Veruca wasn't impressed. She stood at the edge of the lake, arms crossed, watching the other campers splash and dive in. "Come on, Veruca," Emily called, already waist deep in the water. "You can't spend the whole day on the shore." Veruca shook her head. "I'm not getting in there." Patrick Stump, who was acting as a lifeguard, walked by and overheard. "You know, the lake's pretty nice. Nothing to worry about except maybe the occasional fish nibble." Fish nibble exclamation point. Veruca backed away, horrified. "Absolutely not." Emily swam over to the shore, giving her a playful smirk. "Don't worry. I'll protect you from the fish." Veruca was about to retort, but Emily grabbed her hand and pulled her in with surprising strength. With a splash, Veruca was in the water, sputtering and flailing. "I hate this," she shrieked, trying to stand in the shallow water. But despite her protests, the cool water felt refreshing under the blazing sun. She wiped her face, glared at Emily, and mumbled, "Fine. But just this once." Emily laughed. "I knew you'd come around." As the day went on, Veruca couldn't help but grudgingly admit that maybe, just maybe, there was something enjoyable about camp. Chapter 3, The Prank. By the third day of camp, Veruca had begrudgingly accepted that she was stuck here, and despite herself, she was beginning to tolerate Emily's boundless energy. Emily had a way of making even the worst situations seem fun. And as much as Veruca hated to admit it, the lake wasn't all bad, especially now that she knew the fish wouldn't eat her toes. But the real surprise came during breakfast when a new girl sat down at their table. Her name was Sophie, and she was quiet, with a shy smile and dark brown hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Emily had waved her over the moment she spotted her standing alone with her tray. "Hey, come sit with us," Emily said, grinning as she scooted over to make room. Sophie smiled nervously. "Thanks, I didn't really know anyone here." "Now you do," Emily said confidently. "I'm Emily, and this is Veruca." Veruca gave a small nod, still a little guarded. "Hi." As they ate, Sophie slowly opened up, and the three of them started talking about camp, their favorite activities, and how awful the camp food was. But eventually, the conversation turned to why Sophie seemed a little withdrawn. "So, how do you like camp so far?" Emily asked between bites of cereal. Sophie shrugged, poking at her food. "It's okay, I guess. My parents thought it would be good for me to get out of the house for a while. They're going through a divorce." Veruca, usually indifferent to other people's problems, felt a twinge of sympathy. She might have been spoiled, but she knew what it was like to have parents who didn't always pay attention to what you really needed. "That sucks," she said, surprising even herself with the softness in her tone. Sophie nodded, her eyes downcast. "Yeah. It's been pretty hard. I didn't want to come here, but my mom thought it'd be good for me to make friends." "Well, she was right," Emily said brightly, throwing an arm around Sophie's shoulders. Because now you've got us. Sophie's smile returned, a little more genuine this time. Thanks, guys. From that moment on, Sophie became the third member of their little group. They spent the rest of the morning hanging out by the lake, playing cards, and swapping stories. Veruca, Emily, and Sophie found themselves laughing more than they had all week. Despite their different backgrounds, they clicked in a way that surprised them all. But things weren't all sunshine and smiles at camp. There was a group of girls who seemed to think they owned the place, the so-called popular girls. They were loud, always dressed in the latest trendy gear despite being at a rustic camp, and never missed an opportunity to belittle anyone they considered beneath them. At the head of the group was Chloe, a tall, blonde girl with an attitude that made Veruca roll her eyes every time she saw her. Ugh, they're the worst, Emily whispered one afternoon as they watched Chloe and her crew strut across the campgrounds, laughing at some poor camper they'd just teased. I hate girls like that, Sophie muttered. They're the same kind of people who gave me a hard time when my parents were fighting. Veruca's eyes narrowed. Normally, she wasn't one for group dynamics, she preferred to look out for herself, but seeing the way Sophie tensed up around the popular girls, something snapped inside her. Maybe it was because she knew what it was like to feel out of place. Or maybe, just maybe, she was starting to care about these new friends. We should get back at them, Veruca said suddenly, a wicked glint in her eyes. Emily and Sophie looked at her, intrigued. What do you mean? Emily asked. Veruca leaned in, lowering her voice. A prank. Something to knock Chloe and her gang down a peg. Sophie hesitated. Won't we get in trouble? Veruca smirked. Only if we get caught. The plan came together quickly after that. Veruca had always been clever when it came to getting what she wanted, and now she was using that same cunning to orchestrate the perfect prank. The popular girls always gathered by the lake after lunch, lounging on their inflatable pool floats and gossiping like they were on a private beach vacation. We'll fill their pool floats with glitter, Veruca explained as they gathered supplies. When they sit on them, the glitter will explode everywhere. It'll be a disaster for them, and they'll never see it coming. Emily grinned. That's genius, Sophie giggled nervously, but there was excitement in her eyes. Alright, let's do it. That afternoon, the trio snuck down to the lake while Chloe and her group were at lunch. Veruca had managed to borrow some glitter from the camp art supply, and Emily distracted the camp counselor by pretending she needed help with a fishing hook. Sophie stood guard as Veruca and Emily carefully unzipped the seams of the floats, dumping in handfuls of the glitter. Chloe's gonna freak out, Emily whispered gleefully as they finished up. Veruca nodded, satisfied. She deserves it. They finished just in time. As they slipped away, they could see Chloe and her gang approaching, completely unaware of the trap that had been set. The girls made it back to their cabin and waited, barely able to contain their laughter. Sure enough, not 10 minutes later, they heard screams from the lake. Chloe's voice rang out in fury. What the question mark? There's glitter everywhere. Emily burst into laughter, clutching her stomach. We did it. Sophie was giggling too, her worries momentarily forgotten. That was amazing, Veruca grinned, feeling a surge of pride. Maybe camp wasn't so bad after all. But their victory was short-lived. As they basked in the aftermath of their prank, a shadow loomed over them. Veruca looked up to see Pete Wentz standing at the door of their cabin, arms crossed, a knowing look on his face. Nice try, girls, he said, raising an eyebrow. But you're busted, Emily gasped. How did you dart? Pete held up a walkie-talkie. Let's just say I've got eyes and ears all over this camp. Detention. All three of you. Sophie's face fell. Detention? But it was just a prank, yeah, Veruca added, trying to salvage the situation. And they deserved it. Pete shook his head, though there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. Maybe so, but you still broke the rules. Detention starts after dinner. Be there, or it'll be double. The three girls groaned in unison as Pete walked away, leaving them to face the consequences of their glittery revenge. Well, Emily said with a grin, at least it was worth it. Sophie nodded. Totally, Veruca, still annoyed about getting caught, couldn't help but smile. Yeah, it definitely was. Chapter 4. The cabin detention was about as boring as Veruca expected. Sitting in a musty old room with Pete Wentz and the rest of the admin team supervising, the girls were forced to write apology letters to Chloe and her friends. Veruca's letter was short and insincere, and Sophie kept glancing at her, suppressing giggles as she wrote her own half-hearted apology. Emily, ever the optimist, tried to spin her letter into something heartfelt but gave up halfway through. After what felt like hours, Pete finally stood up. "Alright, detention's over. But don't think this means you're off the hook," Veruca groaned. "What now?" "More chores," Pete smirked. "Oh, we've got something much more interesting in mind for you three." Patrick Stump walked over, holding a large, ancient-looking key in his hand. "You're going to be spending the next week in a cabin away from the rest of camp. It's been empty for years, and we think it'll give you some time to reflect on your behavior." Veruca's eyes narrowed. "You can't be serious. A cabin, Art?" Joe Troman chuckled. "It's not just any cabin. It's almost 268 years old. Some say it's haunted." Sophie's eyes widened. "Haunted, relax," Patrick said, patting her on the shoulder. "There's nothing to worry about, except maybe the Duracell Bunny." Emily raised an eyebrow. "The Duracell Bunny? Isn't that a battery mascot?" Pete crossed his arms. "He's a little more than that here. We trained him as a guard. He's faster than you think, and he never runs out of energy. You'll have to be careful around him." Veruca was not impressed. "You're joking, right?" Patrick shook his head, dangling the key. "Nope. You'll be moving in tonight. Oh, and one more thing, you can't talk about whatever you want. The cabin has rules." Emily glanced nervously at Veruca, who seemed more annoyed than scared. "Rules? Like what?" "You'll figure them out soon enough," Joe said with a mysterious grin. "Now grab your stuff. It's a bit of a hike." The walk to the cabin was long and winding, the path overgrown with weeds and branches. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest around them grew darker and more ominous. Veruca, Sophie, and Emily trudged along behind Patrick and Joe, none of them particularly thrilled with the idea of living in an old, possibly haunted cabin with a hyperactive bunny for a guard. When they finally arrived, the cabin stood in a small clearing, its weathered wooden exterior looming in the shadows. The roof sagged slightly, and the windows were covered in dust and grime. It looked every bit its 268 years. "This place is a dump," Veruca muttered. Sophie shivered. "It definitely looks haunted." Emily tried to stay positive, though her voice wavered. "Well, at least we've got it to ourselves, right? It'll be like a sleepover, sort of." Patrick handed Veruca the key. "This is your new home for the next week. We'll check in on you, but remember, follow the rules, or you might not like what happens." Veruca rolled her eyes and took the key. "Whatever. Let's just get this over with." The three girls entered the cabin, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath their feet. Inside, it was dusty and dim, with old furniture scattered around haphazardly. There were 3 small beds pushed up against the walls, a fireplace that hadn't been used in years, and a heavy, musty smell that filled the air. "This is cozy," Emily offered, trying to lighten the mood. Veruca dropped her bag on one of the beds. "This is ridiculous. How are we supposed to live in here?" Sophie glanced nervously at the door. "Do you really think the Duracell Bunny is out there?" Before anyone could answer, a loud thumping noise came from outside. They all froze, staring at the door. The thumping grew louder, faster, like something running at full speed. Emily whispered, "It can't be, right?" The door suddenly rattled, and then a blur of pink and silver zipped past the window. Veruca jumped back, her heart racing. What was that? Sophie peeked out the window, her eyes wide. I think it was the Duracell Bunny." Sure enough, a flash of pink darted past the window again, this time stopping just outside the door. Through the crack in the wood, they could see the small figure of the Duracell Bunny, its tiny feet tapping the ground restlessly. It looked just like the mascot, only much more real, and much more menacing. Its little paws were crossed in front of its chest, and its eyes seemed to glow faintly in the dark. "Okay, this is officially weird," Veruca muttered. Emily laughed nervously. "Weird? It's a giant pink bunny guarding our cabin." Sophie, now visibly shaking, whispered, "What do we do?" Before anyone could answer, the bunny thumped its feet on the ground again, as if warning them. Veruca took a deep breath. We don't do anything. We stay inside, follow the rules, and we don't mess with it, right? Emily said, trying to calm herself. So, what are these rules? They looked around the cabin, searching for any sign of the mysterious rules Pete had mentioned. On the wall above the fireplace, there was an old wooden plaque with faded writing on it. Veruca stepped closer, squinting at the words. The plaque read, Cabin Rules 1. Do not speak of the outside world after sunset. 2. Do not leave the cabin after dark. 3. Do not disturb the guard. 4. Do not discuss secrets in the cabin. 5. Obey the guard signals. Veruca read the rules aloud, her voice growing quieter with each one. When she finished, there was a heavy silence in the cabin. Emily and Sophie exchanged uneasy glances. What does it mean by obey the guard signals? Sophie asked. Veruca shrugged. I guess we'll find out. Outside, the Duracell Bunny thumped its feet again, as if to remind them that it was still there. This is so creepy, Emily whispered. What happens if we break the rules? Sophie bit her lip. I don't think we want to find out, Veruca nodded, her usual confidence replaced by an annoying sense of dread. Well, we're not going to break them. We'll just stay quiet, stay inside, and make it through the week. But as the night wore on, the cabin seemed to close in around them, the weight of the rules pressing down like an invisible force. And outside, the relentless thumping of the Duracell Bunny echoed in the darkness, a constant reminder that they weren't alone. Veruca, Emily, and Sophie huddled together in their beds, trying to sleep, but the eerie atmosphere made it nearly impossible. None of them said a word. They knew better than to speak after sunset. The cabin had rules, and they had no choice but to follow them. Chapter 5. The first day of summer morning broke with a faint, eerie glow seeping through the dusty windows of the old cabin. Veruca, Emily, and Sophie had barely slept, the weight of the cabin's strange rules and the constant presence of the Duracell Bunny pressing on their minds. The bunny had stayed outside all night, its soft but steady thumping reverberating like a heartbeat, reminding them that it was still there, guarding, waiting. Veruca was the first to sit up, her eyes gritty from lack of sleep. This place is a nightmare, she muttered, rubbing her temples. How are we supposed to survive a whole week in here? Emily yawned, stretching her arms and giving Veruca a tired smile. At least it's daylight now. We just have to stick together. Sophie sat up too, looking around the cabin's dim interior. I still can't believe they actually put us in here. And those rules. What kind of camp does this? Veruca's eyes flicked to the plaque on the wall, the old wooden sign with the cabin's unsettling rules. They hadn't dared to speak much after sunset the night before, but now, in the dull light of morning, the rules seemed even more sinister. I don't know, Veruca replied, her voice edged with frustration. But I'm not going to let some creepy rules and a battery-powered bunny get the better of me. We'll just have to be careful. Emily got up and peered out one of the windows, cautiously looking for any sign of their fluffy tormentor. I don't see the bunny, she said, her voice light with relief. Maybe it's gone. Good riddance, Veruca muttered, standing up and stretching. Now, what do we do for food? Do they expect us to starve in this old place? Just as she said that, a knock came at the door. They all jumped, hearts racing. Emily cautiously approached, opening the door to find a basket of food sitting on the porch: fresh fruit, bread, and some bottled water. But there was no sign of anyone around. They just left this here? Sophie asked, frowning. It's like we're being monitored. As if in response to her words, a soft click echoed through the room. Veruca's eyes immediately snapped to a dark corner of the cabin where she hadn't noticed before. There, nestled discreetly among the dusty beams, was a small, black camera, its red light blinking quietly. We are being watched, Veruca said through gritted teeth. Emily turned, her eyes wide as she followed Veruca's gaze. A camera? But why? Sophie swallowed, her face paling. They're watching everything we do, Veruca's mind raced. This isn't just about detention. They're testing us, seeing how far they can push us. That's why the rules are so strict, why we can't talk about whatever we want. Emily stared at the camera, then at Veruca. So, what do we do? If they are watching, There's no way we can escape without getting caught. Veruca clenched her fists, feeling the familiar surge of defiance rise inside her. We play their game for now. But that doesn't mean we're not going to figure out a way out of this. Sophie, nervously tugging at her shirt, added, but what about the bunny? And the rules? What if breaking them isn't just about getting in trouble? What if something worse happens? Veruca knew Sophie had a point, but the thought of being controlled, watched like a lab rat, infuriated her. We'll follow the rules, but we'll figure out what's really going on. I'm not letting Pete Wentz and his band get away with locking us in this creepy place. They sat down for breakfast, eating the food in tense silence. It wasn't just the presence of the camera that made them uneasy, it was the cabin itself. The old wood creaked and groaned, and the shadows in the corners seemed darker than they should be. Every sound from outside made them jump, worried the Duracell Bunny was coming back. As they ate, Emily suddenly paused, her eyes scanning the walls. Wait. Look, there's more of them. Veruca followed her gaze and saw it too. Cameras. There was one in almost every corner of the cabin, small and hidden, but there. Watching. Recording. The realization sent a chill down her spine. How many are there? Sophie whispered. At least 4, Veruca replied, standing up and inspecting them closely. Probably more outside. They're not just watching us, Emily said, her voice trembling slightly. They're waiting for us to mess up, Veruca nodded. Exactly. And that means we can't trust anything here. We have to stick to the rules, at least until we figure out what their endgame is. The morning dragged on, the oppressive atmosphere of the cabin never letting up. They didn't dare talk too freely, knowing the cameras were always there, listening. Every moment felt like they were under a microscope, their every move scrutinized. Veruca hated it more than she could express. She wasn't used to being controlled, and the constant surveillance was suffocating. By midday, they had explored every inch of the cabin, looking for clues or anything that might help them understand what was really going on. But the more they searched, the more the feeling of helplessness set in. Whoever had designed this twisted punishment had thought of everything. Sophie sat down on one of the old, creaky beds, hugging her knees to her chest. What if we can't get out? What if we're stuck here for more than a week? Emily sat beside her, patting her back. We'll make it. We just have to stay smart. Veruca, staring at the cameras again, clenched her fists. We'll find a way out. But we can't rush it. We need to figure out exactly what they want from us and then we turn it against them. But deep down, Veruca knew that breaking free wouldn't be easy. The cameras, the rules, the ever-present guard, it all felt like a trap, closing in tighter with every passing hour. As the afternoon wore on, a strange heaviness filled the air, and the shadows inside the cabin seemed to grow longer. It was almost as if the very walls were alive, listening to their every word. Veruca, for once, felt out of control. And outside, just on the edge of the woods, the familiar sound of thumping feet began again. The Duracell Bunny, back on guard, ready to enforce the rules they couldn't afford to break. Chapter 6. The escape. The sun had just begun to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the cabin. Veruca paced back and forth, her frustration simmering just below the surface. She couldn't take it anymore. The cameras, the rules, the constant presence of the Duracell Bunny thumping outside like some kind of relentless jailer. She had never been one to sit quietly and follow orders, and this situation was no exception. Sophie and Emily sat on their beds, watching her with anxious expressions. They felt the tension building too. The suffocating atmosphere of the cabin had become unbearable, and the feeling of being watched was driving all of them to the edge. This is ridiculous, Veruca snapped, pausing in her pacing. I'm not staying in this haunted dump for one more night. Emily glanced nervously at the window, where the last bits of sunlight were fading. But what about the rules? If we leave after dark, we'll be breaking them. Veruca shook her head. I don't care about the rules anymore. They're using those cameras to control us, and I'm not going to let them win. Sophie bit her lip, her voice trembling slightly. And the bunny? It's out there, guarding us. Veruca walked over to the window and peered out. The Duracell Bunny was resting just outside the cabin, its small pink form barely visible in the shadows. It looked fast asleep, its tiny body rising and falling with each breath. "It's asleep," Veruca said, turning back to the others. "This is our chance. We can sneak past it and get out of here." Emily stood up, hesitant but determined. "Are you sure? What if it wakes up? We'll be fast," Veruca replied, her voice firm. "If we don't try now, we might never get another chance." Sophie stood as well, her fear replaced by a flicker of hope. "Okay. Let's do it." Veruca grabbed the key to the cabin and quietly unlocked the door, pulling it open just wide enough for them to slip out. The cool night air greeted them, and for a moment, the weight of the cabin's oppressive atmosphere lifted. But they weren't free yet. The three girls tiptoed out of the cabin, holding their breath as they passed the sleeping bunny. It twitched slightly but didn't wake, its ears twitching as if still listening even in its dreams. Once they were a few yards away from the cabin, Veruca motioned for them to move faster. They darted through the trees, the dense forest swallowing the sound of their footsteps. For the first time since arriving at the camp, they felt a surge of adrenaline, not from fear, but from the thrill of rebellion. They ran deeper into the woods, the moonlight guiding their way. After what felt like hours, they slowed down, finally catching their breath. "We did it," Sophie whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "We actually got out," Veruca smirked. "Told you. That bunny's not as tough as they think." But just as they began to relax, Emily pointed ahead. "Look. There's another cabin." Sure enough, through the trees, they could see another old, run-down cabin, almost identical to the one they had just escaped from. It was nestled deeper in the woods, hidden away from the main campgrounds. A soft glow came from the windows, as if someone was inside. "Do you think someone else is in there?" Sophie asked, her voice hushed. "Only one way to find out," Veruca said, already moving toward the cabin. As they approached, they could hear faint sounds from inside, a voice, low and muffled, talking to itself. Veruca knocked lightly on the door, and the talking stopped. After a moment, the door creaked open, and a boy around their age stood in the doorway. He had messy dark hair, and his clothes were slightly wrinkled, as if he'd been living in the cabin for days. His eyes widened when he saw the three girls standing there. "Who are you?" he asked, stepping back cautiously. "We could ask you the same thing," Veruca said, crossing her arms. "We're from another cabin, but we snuck out." "What's your story?" The boy sighed and opened the door wider, gesturing for them to come in. "You might as well come in. It's not like anyone's watching." The inside of the cabin was much like theirs, old, dusty, and eerily quiet. The boy sat down on a worn chair, looking a bit embarrassed. "I'm Jake," he said. "I got put in detention, same as you guys, I guess. They stuck me in this cabin a few days ago." Sophie looked around, her curiosity piqued. "Why? What did you do?" Jake shrugged. "Same thing you probably did, messed with the wrong people. I played a prank on some of the camp staff. They didn't find it funny." Veruca raised an eyebrow. "So, they just left you here? With no way out?" Jake nodded. "Pretty much. I tried to escape once, but, well, the bunny found me." Emily shivered. "The Duracell Bunny?" Jake's eyes darkened. "Yeah. That thing's not normal. I've been stuck here ever since. I didn't think anyone else was going through the same thing." "Well, now you've got company," Veruca said, a determined glint in her eyes. "We're not staying locked up in these cabins forever. We'll figure out a way to beat the cameras, the rules, and that bunny." Jake looked at her, a flicker of hope crossing his face. "You really think we can get out of here?" Veruca smiled, her confidence growing. "I know we can. But we'll need to stick together." Sophie and Emily nodded, their spirits lifting. They had found an ally in Jake, and now, they weren't just three girls stuck in a weird, creepy camp. They were a team, ready to fight back against whatever twisted game the camp was playing. As the night wore on, they huddled together in the cabin, whispering plans and sharing stories of how they had all ended up there. The cameras and the rules still loomed over them, but for the first time, they felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't alone anymore. But as they whispered and plotted, they all knew one thing: escaping wouldn't be easy. The camp wasn't going to let them go without a fight. And somewhere out there, the Duracell Bunny was waiting, its endless energy making it a relentless foe. They would have to be smarter, faster, and braver than ever before. But if anyone could outwit the camp and its strange guardians, it was Veruca Salt, and now, she had a team to help her do it. Chapter 7. Freedom arrives the next morning. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the gaps in the trees, casting a golden glow on Veruca, Emily, and Sophie as they stood outside their cabin. The thrill of their successful escape still lingered, but there was no mistaking the sense of foreboding that hung in the air. They were free from the old, creaky cabin, but the camp's grip hadn't loosened. And Jake was still stuck in his. They had shared whispers throughout the night, hatching plans and laughing softly at their small victory. But the mood had quickly shifted when Jake mentioned his cabin's particular rules even stranger than theirs. One stood out among the rest. He wasn't allowed to talk to anyone outside his cabin. "I'm glad you guys found me," Jake had said, his smile fading. "But if the admins find out, well, I'm in serious trouble." Veruca's face had hardened. "We'll figure something out. They can't control all of us." But now, standing in the soft morning light, the weight of their reality began to sink in. They couldn't ignore the rules forever, and Jake's punishment seemed inevitable. He hadn't just broken a rule, he defied the very structure of this bizarre camp. "Do you think they know yet?" Sophie whispered, her eyes darting nervously around the woods. "I don't know," Veruca replied, her voice firm but laced with uncertainty. "But if they do, we'll deal with it." Emily, always the most cautious, bit her lip. Jake's cabin, it had even more cameras than ours. They were probably watching us the whole time. Veruca clenched her fists, the fire in her gut flaring up again. "We're not going to let them win. We can't." But the day dragged on in tense silence, with each of them expecting something to happen, some consequence for their rebellion. They stayed close to their cabin, not daring to venture too far in case the admin team showed up. The campgrounds felt eerily quiet, as if everyone else knew something they didn't. It wasn't until the afternoon that their fears were confirmed. A loud knock echoed through their cabin, and before anyone could react, the door swung open. Pete Wentz stood in the doorway, flanked by two of his bandmates. His usually laid-back expression was replaced by something colder, more calculating. "We need to have a talk," he said, his voice serious. Veruca, Emily, and Sophie exchanged worried glances, but it was Jake who Pete's eyes landed on. "Jake, you know the rules. You were warned about interacting with anyone outside your cabin." Jake swallowed hard, stepping forward. It wasn't their fault. They didn't know." Pete shook his head, his tone still firm but not angry. "Doesn't matter. The rules apply to everyone." Veruca took a step forward, fire in her eyes. "This is ridiculous. You can't just lock people in cabins and watch them like lab rats." "What kind of camp is this?" Pete raised an eyebrow. "You're testing the limits, Veruca. But this isn't about you right now." He turned back to Jake. "You've broken the rules. There has to be consequences." Jake's face paled. "What are you going to do to me?" "You'll stay in your cabin. No leaving. No visitors. This time, we'll make sure of it." Veruca stepped forward, her voice raised. "You can't do that. This is insane." Pete glanced at her but said nothing. He nodded to his bandmates, and without another word, they escorted Jake back to his cabin, leaving the girls standing there, helpless and angry. Hours passed in strained silence. Veruca paced back and forth, Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, and Emily stared out the window, deep in thought. "We can't leave him in there," Emily said quietly, her voice breaking the tension. "They'll just keep him locked up forever." Veruca nodded. "We'll find a way to get him out. But we need to be smart." The rest of the day passed painfully slow, the sun sinking behind the trees, casting long shadows over the camp. As night fell, Veruca, Sophie, and Emily huddled in their cabin, making a plan. They knew Jake couldn't stay in his cabin indefinitely, and Emily, always the most careful and quiet of the group, volunteered to sneak in and free him. "We'll keep watch," Veruca said, her jaw set with determination. "If anyone comes, we'll distract them." Emily nodded, slipping on her sneakers. "I'll be quick. Just keep an eye out." She crept out of their cabin under the cover of darkness, the silence of the woods surrounding her like a blanket. The camp seemed deserted, but she knew better. The cameras were always watching, even when no one else was around. Emily moved swiftly through the trees, avoiding the main paths and sticking to the shadows. When she reached Jake's cabin, her heart raced, but she steeled herself and approached the door. "Jake," she whispered softly, tapping on the window. Inside, Jake stirred, his eyes widening when he saw her. He rushed to the window and opened it just enough to whisper through. "Emily? What are you doing here? If they catch you, I'm not leaving you in here," Emily whispered back. "I'll get you out." She worked quickly, finding a loose window in the back of the cabin and prying it open just enough for Jake to slip through. He looked at her with a mix of gratitude and fear as he climbed out. "We need to move fast," Emily said, already leading him toward the trees. Veruca and Sophie are keeping watch. Suddenly, a bright light cut through the darkness, illuminating the two of them. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. From behind a nearby tree, Pete Wentz and two other members of the admin team stepped forward, their expressions grim. Well, Pete said, his voice low. "It looks like you've broken the rules too, Emily." Jake's face fell, and Emily's stomach twisted. They'd been caught. "We gave you a chance," Pete continued, stepping closer. "But it seems you don't like to follow the rules." Emily's heart raced as she glanced at Jake. They were in serious trouble now, and she had no idea how they were going to get out of it. As Pete nodded to his team, the light dimmed, and Emily felt a firm hand on her shoulder. The camp's game was far from over, and now, it seemed like the stakes were higher than ever. Chapter 8, Trauma. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the camp as Emily and Jake were led away from the trees, the admin team's grip unyielding. Veruca and Sophie watched helplessly from their cabin, the shadows of their friends fading into the darkness. A sense of dread filled the air as they realized the gravity of the situation. "Emily," Veruca called out, but her voice was swallowed by the night. "What do you think they'll do to them?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Veruca replied, pacing anxiously. "But it can't be good. We have to do something." Inside the camp's main lodge, Emily and Jake were taken to a small, dimly lit room filled with supplies for various camp activities. Pete Wentz stood in front of them, arms crossed, his expression stern. "You both know what you did was against the rules," he said, his tone brokering no argument. "Now, you'll learn your lesson." "Learn what?" "That we're not allowed to help each other," Emily shot back, her heart racing. "This is unfair." "Unfair or not, it's the rules," Pete replied. "And breaking them has consequences." They were assigned a series of grueling tasks that seemed designed to humiliate and punish them. They spent the day hauling heavy supplies, scrubbing the floors of the main lodge, and cleaning out the storage shed. Each task was more demeaning than the last, and the constant supervision of the admin team felt suffocating. As the hours dragged on, Emily and Jake exchanged weary glances, their spirits waning with every passing moment. They had expected some sort of punishment, but this was beyond what either had imagined. "This is insane," Jake muttered as they scrubbed the floor together. "I thought they were just messing around," Emily nodded, trying to keep her chin up. "We'll get through this. We just have to stay strong." Meanwhile, back at their cabin, Veruca and Sophie couldn't shake the feeling of guilt and anger. They huddled together, whispering plans to get Emily and Jake out of their predicament. "What if we confront the admin team?" Sophie suggested, her eyes wide with determination. "They can't treat them like this." "Do you really think that would work?" Veruca replied, frustration edging her voice. "They'll just throw us all in detention, but we can't just sit here," Sophie exclaimed. "We have to do something." Before they could argue further, the sound of footsteps caught their attention. A new arrival stepped into the camp, Charlie Bucket, looking bewildered but hopeful as he navigated the grounds. His innocent demeanor stood out among the camp's chaos. "Is this the camp?" he asked, glancing around. Veruca and Sophie exchanged looks of surprise and curiosity. "Charlie," Veruca called out, waving him over. "You have to help us." Charlie approached cautiously, his eyes darting around. "What's going on? You look worried." "It's Emily and Jake," Sophie explained quickly. "They've been punished for trying to help each other, and now they're stuck doing horrible tasks for the admin team." Charlie frowned. his brow furrowing with concern. That doesn't sound right. What can I do? Veruca leaned in, her voice low and urgent. We need to get them out of there. We can't just let them suffer while we sit around doing nothing. Charlie nodded, determination creeping into his expression. Let's go find them. Maybe we can talk to the admins together. As the three of them made their way to the main lodge, Veruca felt a surge of hope. Charlie had a kind heart, and his presence seemed to lighten the weight of their situation, if only slightly. Maybe together they could confront the admin team and demand justice for Emily and Jake. When they reached the lodge, they could hear the sounds of scrubbing and groaning coming from inside. The sight of their friends, exhausted and battered from their forced labor, made Veruca's heart ache. Jake. Emily, Veruca called out, stepping into the room. The two looked up, their expressions shifting from despair to surprise. Veruca? What are you doing here? Emily gasped, momentarily forgetting her fatigue. We came to help you, Charlie said, stepping forward. This isn't right. Pete Wentz appeared from behind a pile of supplies, his face darkening at the sight of the three newcomers. What do you think you're doing here? You're not supposed to be in this area. Veruca squared her shoulders, feeling a rush of courage. We're here to stand up for our friends. This punishment is cruel, and it needs to stop. Emily looked at Veruca with wide eyes, admiration mixed with fear. Veruca, Pete's expression hardened. You think you can just waltz in here and challenge us? That's not how it works. Each of you is responsible for the rules you've broken. Sophie stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. They were just trying to help each other. It's not fair to punish them for that. Charlie nodded, backing them up. If you're going to keep punishing them, you have to punish all of us. We're a team. You can't just isolate them. Pete looked at the four of them, and for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. But he quickly masked it, crossing his arms and glaring. That's not how this works. You want to be punished too? Fine. You'll all take part in these tasks. Emily felt her heart sink as Pete spoke, but Veruca's defiance only grew. We'll do it together, then. We won't back down. What do you think you're going to accomplish? Pete challenged. Jake, worn but emboldened by the support of his friends, spoke up. We'll show you that we're stronger together. You can't keep breaking us apart. The tension in the room escalated as Pete narrowed his eyes, weighing his options. The moment hung heavy in the air, a standoff between the camp's authority and the strength of friendship. With a sigh, Pete relented. Fine. You want to work together? You'll all have the same tasks, starting right now. But don't think this means you've won. You're still under my watch. Veruca exchanged glances with Emily, Sophie, and Jake. They may have lost a small battle, but together, they had stood up for one another. And as they prepared for their collective punishment, the bond among them felt stronger than ever. In that moment, Veruca realized that while the camp might have control over their bodies, they couldn't break their spirits. They were a team, and together, they would find a way to escape this madness. Chapter 9, The Big Sneak Out. The clock struck to 10 a.m., its soft chime echoing in the stillness of the camp. In the darkened cabin, Veruca, Sophie, and Charlie were packed and ready, adrenaline coursing through their veins. They had spent hours quietly gathering their things, whispering plans under the blanket of night. Are you sure we can do this? Sophie asked, glancing at the door nervously. Veruca nodded, determination etched across her face. We have to try. We can't leave Emily and Jake behind forever. Charlie, his eyes bright with excitement, added, if we can just get to the edge of the camp, we'll have a chance to figure things out. They slipped out of the cabin, the cool night air brushing against their skin. The camp was shrouded in darkness, the only sounds being the rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets. As they moved stealthily, they avoided the paths illuminated by cameras, sticking to the shadows. Remember, no noise, Veruca whispered as they crept through the trees. Minutes later, they reached the edge of the camp and slipped through a gap in the fence, their hearts racing. Freedom felt so close, yet so distant. The trio navigated the winding streets, eventually spotting an old museum that seemed abandoned. Let's check it out, Veruca suggested, curiosity piqued. Inside, the museum was dark and dusty, filled with exhibits covered in sheets. They made their way cautiously through the hall, the thrill of adventure igniting their spirits. As they wandered deeper, they stumbled upon a display that captured their attention, a glass heart, glimmering under a dim light. "Look at that," Sophie breathed, eyes wide. "It's beautiful." Veruca stepped closer, reaching out to touch the heart. Just as her fingers brushed against the cool surface, a piercing alarm shattered the silence. "Run!" Charlie yelled, panic flooding the air. They bolted for the exit, adrenaline fueling their escape. As they burst through the doors, they could hear the distant sounds of sirens approaching, a cacophony of chaos that marked their desperate flight. Outside, they sprinted away from the museum, but it wasn't long before they were apprehended by police officers who had been dispatched to the scene. "Stop right there," one of the officers shouted, his flashlight beam catching them in its glare. Veruca, Sophie, and Charlie exchanged frantic looks as they were led to the police car, hearts pounding with a mix of fear and disbelief. They had sought freedom, but now found themselves in a far worse predicament. Meanwhile, back at the camp, the sun rose on a new day, and Emily and Jake were finally released from their detention. They stumbled out into the sunlight, exhausted but relieved. "Did you hear anything from Veruca, Sophie, or Charlie?" Emily asked, her stomach twisting with worry. Jake shook his head. "No. But we need to find them." As they walked back toward their cabin, Jake hesitated. "I have to go back to my cabin. I still live there, and I don't want to draw attention." Emily nodded, understanding the gravity of his situation. "Okay, just be careful. I'll keep looking for them." Jake gave her a reassuring smile before slipping away toward his cabin. Alone now, Emily felt a pang of loneliness but was determined to keep searching for her friends. As she wandered through the campgrounds, she noticed a girl sitting on a bench, sketching in a notebook. Intrigued, Emily approached her. "Hey, what are you drawing?" The girl looked up, a friendly smile breaking across her face. "Just some designs. I'm Corley, Emily," she introduced herself. "Do you know if any of the campers went missing last night?" My friend's Corley's expression turned serious. "I heard something about some kids sneaking out. They might have gotten caught." "Yeah, that's them," Emily said, her heart sinking. "Veruca, Sophie, and Charlie." Corley leaned in closer, her voice conspiratorial. "I heard they were seen near the museum. It's not far from here. We should go check it out. Can you help me?" Emily asked, hope igniting within her. "Of course," Corley replied, standing up. "Let's see if we can find out what happened." Together, they set off, ready to uncover the fate of their friends, determined to bring them back home. Little did they know, Veruca, Sophie, and Charlie were already facing their own challenges, trapped in a police station, plotting their next move. The night's events had set off a chain reaction that none of them could have anticipated, and their destinies were now intertwined in ways they never imagined. Chapter 10. The call. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead as Veruca sat in a small room, the cold metal chair pressing into her back. Her heart raced, a mix of dread and anxiety filling the air around her. Sophie and Charlie sat beside her, equally tense, as an officer handed her a phone. "You need to call your mother and explain what happened," the officer said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Veruca swallowed hard, the phone feeling heavy in her hand. She took a deep breath, dialing her mom's number with shaky fingers. The ringing felt endless until finally, her mother's voice came through, a mixture of concern and annoyance. "Veruca. Where are you?" "I was worried sick, Mom." Veruca started, but her mother interrupted, her voice sharp. "You need to explain yourself. What have you done?" Veruca felt a heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm at the police station. We snuck out of camp and ended up in a museum." "I didn't mean to." "A museum?" Her mother's voice rose in disbelief. "Do you have any idea how serious this is? You're not allowed to go back to summer camp." The weight of her mother's words hung heavily in the air. Veruca glanced at Sophie and Charlie, their faces mirroring her shock. "Mom, I promise I'll never do it again. Just give me another chance." But her mother's voice was firm. "No, Veruca. You've crossed a line. We'll discuss this when you come home." With that, the call ended, leaving Veruca feeling utterly defeated. She looked at Sophie and Charlie, who wore expressions of shared disappointment. "Now what?" Charlie asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't go back to camp," Veruca said, her heart sinking. What's going to happen to Emily and Jake? Meanwhile, back at the camp, Emily and Corey were buzzing with energy, the news of Veruca's situation spreading through the camp like wildfire. They had overheard the admin team discussing it, and a wave of determination washed over them. "Maybe if we get in trouble too, they'll kick us out and we can join them," Corey suggested, her eyes glinting with mischief. Emily nodded, excitement bubbling up within her. "We can pull a harmless prank. Something small enough to get noticed but not too crazy." They schemed throughout the day, plotting to create a distraction during the ice cream social. Their plan was simple: set off a series of small fireworks they had stashed away and then run for it. As the sun began to set and the festivities commenced, Emily and Corey hid behind the snack table, their hearts racing with anticipation. The campgrounds were alive with laughter and music as campers gathered for ice cream, sports games, and a performance by the admin team. With a nod, they lit the fireworks and watched as the tiny bursts of color lit up the sky. For a moment, it was beautiful until chaos erupted. "Fireworks! Get down!" someone shouted, and a wave of panic spread through the crowd. In the frenzy, Emily and Corey scrambled to escape, but instead of being caught, they found themselves pulled aside by the admin team. Well, Pete Wentz said, crossing his arms with a smirk. "Looks like you two are up to some mischief." Emily's heart sank as she prepared for a reprimand, but to her surprise, Pete continued, "But we have to admit, that was some impressive teamwork." Corey blinked in disbelief. "Wait, what? Congratulations," another admin chimed in, grinning. "You two are the best students of 2024. You'll stay and help with the activities." Emily and Corey exchanged incredulous glances. "But we wanted to get in trouble," Emily protested. "Maybe next time," Pete replied, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "For now, enjoy the festivities." As the two girls were led away, the ice cream social continued in full swing, filled with laughter and cheers. They watched as campers played games, cheered on teams, and enjoyed the vibrant atmosphere. Meanwhile, Veruca, Sophie, and Charlie were still stuck in the police station, missing out on everything. They could only imagine the fun their friends were having, while they faced the uncertainty of what would happen next. "Maybe we can still find a way back," Charlie said, trying to stay optimistic. Veruca sighed. "But how? We're stuck here." Sophie glanced at the officer outside the door, her mind racing. "Maybe if we can get to Emily, she'll help us. She always finds a way." As the night wore on, the camp remained lively, the music and laughter echoing through the night. Veruca, Sophie, and Charlie were determined not to lose hope, dreaming of the day they could reunite with their friends and reclaim the adventure they had started together. Chapter 11. The big meet-up. The night wore on at the camp, filled with laughter and excitement, while Veruca, Sophie, and Charlie remain in limbo at the police station. Emily felt torn as she watched her fellow campers enjoy ice cream, games, and performances under the stars. "Hey, you're looking good," Corey teased, nudging Emily. "What's up? You're not having fun?" Emily forced a smile, but her thoughts were elsewhere. I'm really worried about Veruca, you know. She shouldn't be stuck in that police station." "Come on, Emily. You have to enjoy this moment. Veruca would want you to," Corey urged, trying to lighten the mood. Taking a deep breath, Emily decided to put on a brave face. "You're right. Let's have some fun." She blended into the festivities, chatting with other campers and pretending to join in the excitement. Later, as the camp gathered for a special announcement, Pete Wentz and Patrick Stump took the stage, their charismatic presence drawing everyone's attention. "Good evening, campers," Pete began, a wide grin on his face. "We've had some amazing students this year, and I want to take a moment to recognize our top campers." Emily and Corey cheers erupted from the crowd as Emily blushed, caught off guard. "Us," she exclaimed, exchanging a surprised glance with Corey. "Yes." Patrick chimed in, "You two have shown incredible spirit and creativity. As a reward, you get to do anything you want tonight." Emily's excitement dimmed slightly. "Anything?" Pete leaned closer, his voice conspiratorial. Anything at all, just no more fireworks. Corley's eyes sparkled with mischief. I have an idea, she said, her mind racing with possibilities. What are you thinking? Emily asked, curious yet cautious. Corley grinned widely. Let's sneak into the admin lounge and see what they're hiding. I bet there are some cool snacks or games we can use for our big celebration. Emily hesitated. Do you think that's a good idea? What if we get caught? Come on. We're the best students of 2024. We can't let an opportunity like this slip by, Corley urged, her excitement contagious. With a mix of nerves and exhilaration, Emily nodded. Okay, let's do it. As they made their way toward the admin lounge, Emily felt a flutter of anxiety. They tiptoed through the campgrounds, the sounds of joy echoing behind them as they approached the lounge door, slightly ajar. Inside, the room was cozy, filled with plush couches and colorful decor. The air smelled faintly of popcorn and soda, and a table was stacked high with leftover snacks from previous events. Wow, look at all this, Corley exclaimed, her eyes wide. She started grabbing bags of chips and candy, tossing them into her backpack. Emily laughed, her worries fading momentarily. This is great. But we should be quick. We don't want anyone to notice we're gone. Just as they were about to head back, Corley spotted something shiny on the table, a glittering trophy that read Best Camp Spirit. Can you believe this? Corley laughed, picking it up. We should take a picture with it. Emily rolled her eyes playfully. Okay, but be quick. We need to get back before anyone notices. As Corley posed with the trophy, Emily snapped a quick photo on her phone, the bright flash illuminating the dim room. Suddenly, they heard footsteps approaching. Uh-oh, we need to hide, Emily whispered, panic setting in. Corley quickly dropped the trophy, and they ducked behind the couch just as the door swung open. Two admin members walked in, chatting about the evening's events. I can't believe Veruca and the others got into so much trouble, one of them said. They were really reckless. Emily's heart sank. Veruca was still on her mind. She could only imagine how difficult it was for her and her friends. Yeah, they really messed up, the other admin replied. At least Emily and Corley are keeping the spirit alive. Emily glanced at Corley, who was holding her breath, eyes wide in fear. The admin settled onto the couches, completely unaware of the two girls hiding nearby. As they continued to talk, Emily and Corley exchanged worried glances, realizing they had to make their exit before being discovered. I'll distract them, Corley whispered. You make a run for it, are you sure? Emily asked, concern flooding her voice. Trust me. Just go, Corley urged. Taking a deep breath, Emily nodded and quietly slipped away from their hiding spot, trying to remain as quiet as possible. She made it to the door, but just as she was about to escape, she heard Corley speak up. Hey. What about the snacks? Corley exclaimed, trying to keep the admin's attention on her. Emily looked back just in time to see Corley gesture toward the pile of snacks on the table. The admins turned their attention fully to Corley, who was managing to keep them engaged. Taking advantage of the distraction, Emily slipped out the door and quietly closed it behind her. Breathing a sigh of relief, she couldn't help but smile at Corley's quick thinking. As she rejoined the festivities, she knew she had to find a way to get Veruca and her friends back, no matter what it took. Meanwhile, back at the police station, Veruca, Sophie, and Charlie felt a growing sense of determination. They might be stuck for now, but the bond they had formed would help them find a way back to their friends and the adventure they had started together. Chapter 12, Gluttony of Truth. Sitting in the cold confines of the police station, Veruca felt the pressure mounting around her. With each passing moment, she could feel the weight of her predicament growing heavier. After what seemed like an eternity, she turned to Sophie and Charlie, her mind racing with an idea. We have to say something, Veruca said, her voice firm but laced with desperation. If we don't, we'll be stuck here forever. What do you mean? Charlie asked, brows furrowing in confusion. What if we say that Emily forced us to sneak out? Veruca suggested, a glimmer of mischief in her eyes. It's not entirely untrue. She did want us to join her. Sophie hesitated. But that's not right, Veruca. Emily didn't make us do anything. We chose to go. I know, Veruca replied, urgency creeping into her tone. But we need a way out. And if we pin it on her, maybe they'll let us go." After a moment of silence, Sophie nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but this feels wrong." With a deep breath, Veruca approached the officer in charge. "I want to explain what happened," she said, her voice steady. "It wasn't our fault. Emily forced us to sneak out." The officer raised an eyebrow, surprised by her accusation. "Is that so?" "Yes," Veruca insisted, her heart racing. "We were just following her lead. She wanted to have fun and dragged us along." Sophie and Charlie exchanged worried glances but stayed silent, caught up in Veruca's plan. The officer nodded and took down the details, then decided to call the admin team to inform them of the new development. Meanwhile, at the camp, Emily and Corey were still enjoying the festivities when an admin approached them with a stern expression. "Emily, you need to come with me. We need to discuss what happened with Veruca and the others." Emily's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I didn't do anything wrong, just come with us," the admin said, leading her away from the cheerful chaos. As Emily entered the admin lounge, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Pete Wentz and Patrick Stump were waiting for her, their expression serious. "Emily," Pete began, "we've heard some concerning news from the police station. Veruca is claiming that you forced her and her friends to sneak out." "What?" "That's not true," Emily protested, shaking her head in disbelief. "Veruca is lying. I didn't make her do anything." Patrick exchanged a glance with Pete. "We need to get to the bottom of this. We'll be contacting Veruca's mom to clarify the situation." Emily's heart raced as they made the call. She could only hope Veruca's mom would see through the lie. Back at the police station, the officer returned with the phone. "Veruca, your mother is on the line," he said, handing her the device. Veruca hesitated before taking the call. "Mom, Veruca, what's going on? I just heard from the camp that you've made some serious accusations against Emily." Her mother's voice echoed, cold and disapproving. "Mom," Veruca began, but her mother cut her off. "You're lying, aren't you? You've gotten yourself into trouble again, haven't you?" "No. Emily made us do it," Veruca insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "Your camp director has told me otherwise," her mother replied sharply. "If this is true, you'll face serious consequences when you come home." Veruca felt her heart sink. She was caught in her own web of lies, and the realization hit hard. Minutes later, the officer hung up the phone. "Your mother has decided that you, Sophie, and Charlie will return to summer camp," he said, much to Veruca's shock. "What?" she exclaimed. "No, we can't. You will have to face the camp's disciplinary measures, but it's better than staying here," the officer said. "Your parents will be waiting for you at the camp." As the trio was led back to the camp, Veruca felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. She had lied to escape, and now she was heading back to face the consequences. When they arrived, Emily was waiting for them, her face a mix of relief and concern. "Veruca, are you okay?" she asked, stepping forward. Veruca, feeling guilty, glanced at her friends and back at Emily. I'm sorry," she mumbled, the weight of her lie heavy on her conscience. "What happened?" Emily asked, her expression shifting to confusion. Sophie chimed in. "Veruca said you forced us to sneak out, and now we're back." Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. "Veruca, that's not right. I didn't make you do anything." "I know," Veruca admitted, shame flooding through her. "I thought it would get us out of trouble. Didn't want to be stuck there anymore." Emily shook her head, disappointment evident. "You put me in detention for something I didn't do." Before Veruca could respond, Pete and Patrick arrived, arms crossed and expression serious. "We've heard what's going on," Pete said. "Veruca, lying about your friends is a serious offense. You'll have to stay in detention for a while." Veruca nodded, guilt swallowing her whole. "I understand." As the admins walked away, Emily turned to Veruca, a mixture of anger and concern in her eyes. "You need to own up to this, Veruca. You can't keep lying." "I will," Veruca promised, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry." With the weight of her actions heavy on her heart, Veruca knew she had a long road ahead to mend her friendships and regain trust. And as she faced the consequences, she hoped for a chance to make things right, not just for herself, But for the friends she had nearly lost. Chapter 13. The big fight. Tensions were running high at the camp as Veruca, still feeling the weight of her lie, found herself face to face with Emily. The energy in the air crackled, thick with unspoken words and hurt feelings. "Veruca, you need to apologize," Emily said, frustration evident in her voice. "This isn't just about you anymore." "Why should I? You're the one who got me into trouble," Veruca shot back, her temper flaring. "You're my ex-friend now, Emily. I can't believe I ever trusted you." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "You're going to throw away our friendship because of a stupid mistake? That's ridiculous." The campfire crackled nearby, but the heat of their argument was much more intense. Other campers began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Sophie tried to intervene, stepping between them. "Guys, this isn't helping. We need to calm down," she urged, but her voice barely cut through the mounting hostility. "Stay out of it, Sophie. This is between us," Veruca snapped, her frustration boiling over. Before Sophie could respond, Emily's patience snapped. "You know what? If you want to act like this, maybe we're better off without each other." At that, Veruca pushed Emily hard, and Emily retaliated, shoving Veruca back. The crowd gasped, and chaos erupted as their peers egged them on. The admins, realizing the situation was escalating, rushed in to separate them. "Hey! Enough!" one of the admins shouted, but their voices were drowned out by the noise of the campers. Pete stepped forward, trying to regain control. "This isn't how we handle conflicts. Both of you need to stop." But it was too late. The fight had begun in earnest, and the admins struggled to keep the other campers from joining in. As Veruca and Emily squared off, Charlie and Corley exchanged worried glances. "We need to do something," Corley whispered. "I'll distract them," Charlie said, his mind racing. "You grab the snacks from earlier and start handing them out. It might help calm everyone down." "Okay, but be quick," Corley replied, rushing toward the snack table. Meanwhile, Sophie was still trying to intervene. "Can't you both see how ridiculous this is? Fighting won't solve anything," she pleaded, but Chloe, a popular camper who had always been quick to stir drama, stepped in front of her. "Oh please, Sophie. Like you can talk. You're just trying to play the peacemaker," Chloe sneered. "You're not even involved." Sophie's eyes flashed with anger. "This isn't about me. It's about Veruca and Emily. Can't you see how harmful this is? Why should I care?" "It's more entertaining to watch," Chloe shot back, her smug expression infuriating Sophie even more. As the chaos continued, Veruca and Emily both landed punches, their argument spiraling into a full-blown fight. The admins, realizing they were losing control, finally made the call. "Pete, we have to step in," one of them shouted. "Fine," Pete replied, his expression hardening. "Both of you, to detention." Reluctantly, he pulled Veruca and Emily apart, dragging them away from the scene. The noise faded as they were escorted to the admin lounge, where the tension simmered. "Both of you need to learn a lesson," Pete said, his voice stern. "This behavior is unacceptable, and you will both face consequences for your actions." Veruca and Emily glared at each other as they sat in silence, the reality of their situation settling in. They were both caught in the fallout of a friendship turned sour, and neither of them knew how to fix it. As Charlie and Corley returned, having managed to distract the campers with snacks, they saw the aftermath. "What happened?" Corley asked, her eyes wide. "Veruca and Emily got into a huge fight," Sophie explained, frustration etched on her face. "Now they're both in detention, and I don't know how to fix this." Charlie frowned. "We have to help them somehow. They can't keep going like this." Just then, the admins returned, their expression serious. "You all need to understand the impact of your actions. We're putting a plan in place to address this situation, and you'll all be part of it." Veruca and Emily, sitting in the corner of the lounge, exchanged glances, both realizing the enormity of what they had done. As the admin team laid out the consequences, they could only hope that there was a way to heal the rift that had formed between them before it was too late. Chapter 14. The big truth. As the tension in the admin lounge reached a boiling point, Veruca could feel the weight of her actions pressing down on her. She couldn't take it anymore. "Stop. Everyone, just stop," she screamed, her voice breaking. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to her. "I can't do this anymore." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she took a deep breath, the truth spilling out. "I lied about Emily. It was my idea to sneak out, and I dragged them into it. I was scared and didn't know what else to do. I thought I could escape my problems, but all I did was make everything worse." The vulnerability in her voice hung in the air, and the tension began to dissipate. The other campers and admins exchanged glances, surprised by her raw honesty. Emily stepped forward, her expression softening. "Veruca, I didn't want to fight. I just wanted you to own up to what happened." Veruca looked up, her heart pounding. "I know. I'm so sorry, Emily. I messed everything up. I just wanted to avoid getting in trouble, but I never meant to hurt you." Sophie moved closer, placing a comforting hand on Veruca's shoulder. "We're all here for you, Veruca. We just want to help." As Veruca's sobs echoed in the room, the other campers began to approach, offering their support. "We all make mistakes," Corley said gently, wiping away Veruca's tears. "What matters is how we move forward." The admins watched the scene unfold, their expressions shifting from stern to empathetic. Pete stepped forward, his voice calm. "Thank you for being honest, Veruca. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. We can work through this." Veruca nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. "I just want to go home," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to be here anymore. I need to talk to my parents." "Let's get that arranged," Patrick said, a soft smile breaking through the seriousness of the situation. "You deserve a chance to start fresh." As the admins began to make the necessary calls, Veruca felt a lightness in her heart. Maybe she could mend her friendships and learn from this experience. Corley turned to her, a supportive smile on her face. "I know things got crazy, but I'd still like to be friends, if you want." Veruca's eyes widened in surprise. "Really?" "After everything, of course," Corley replied. "We all mess up. It's part of being human. What matters is that we learn from it." With a soft smile, Veruca nodded. "Thank you, Corley. I'd love that." As the admins finalized the arrangements for Veruca's return home, the atmosphere in the room shifted from tension to hope. The campers who had once been divided now united in support, eager to help their friends heal. "I'm ready to face my parents and be honest with them, too," Veruca said, wiping her tears. "I want to be better." As she prepared to leave, Emily approached her once more. "I hope you know I'm here for you, too. We can work through this together." Veruca smiled, feeling the warmth of forgiveness surround her. "I'd like that, Emily. Thank you for understanding." With that, Veruca stepped forward, ready to embrace a new beginning, one where honesty and friendship would guide her way. She realized that even in the face of mistakes, there was always a chance for redemption. And as she took a deep breath, she felt grateful for the support of her friends, ready to return home and make things right. Chapter 15. Goodbye, Summer Camp. The sun rose on Veruca's final day at summer camp, casting a golden light over the familiar grounds that had once felt so oppressive. Now, as she prepared to leave, she felt a bittersweet sense of closure. The friendships she had forged, even amidst chaos, were meaningful, and she realized how much she would miss them. Gathering her belongings, Veruca found Emily, Sophie, and Corley. "I want to keep in touch with you all," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "Can I have your numbers?" "Of course," Sophie said, pulling out her phone. One by one, they exchanged numbers, their bond solidified despite the ups and downs of the summer. As they finished, Pete Wentz walked by, a somber expression on his face. "Veruca," he said, "I hope you can forgive me for my part in everything. I'm still figuring things out," she replied honestly. "But thank you for acknowledging it." Before she could say more, the sound of sirens pierced the air. A few minutes later, officers arrived, and the camp was abuzz with confusion. Veruca watched as they apprehended Pete for mishandling the situation with the campers, leaving Patrick to step in as the new leader. "Looks like things are changing around here," Corley commented, glancing at the scene. "But," Veruca said, feeling a sense of relief, "this place needs a fresh start." With her bags packed and goodbyes said, Veruca climbed into her parents' car, her heart racing with anticipation. As they drove away from the camp, her parents turned to her. "We're so glad you're home," her mother said warmly. "We missed you. Can we go get ice cream or something?" Veruca suggested, a smile breaking through her earlier uncertainty. "Absolutely," her father replied, the car steering toward their favorite local shop. Later that evening, as Veruca settled back into her home, she felt a mixture of nostalgia and excitement. Just as she was about to relax, there was a knock on the door. Curious, she opened it to find Emily standing there, a wide grin on her face. "Hey. I couldn't wait to see you, Emily. What are you doing here?" Veruca exclaimed, inviting her inside. "I came to tell you some big news," Emily said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "The camp got shut down because of everything that happened. They're investigating the fight and the way things were run." Veruca's eyes widened. "Wow, really? That's huge." "Yeah, and there's something else," Emily continued, her expression serious. "Yesterday, before we left, I found out about a surprise we're planning for you. It's something no one else knows about yet." "What is it?" Veruca asked, intrigued. Emily hesitated, looking around as if ensuring no one else could overhear. "We're planning a reunion for all of us. I want it to be a celebration of our friendship, something to remind us of what we went through together. But I need your help to organize it." Veruca's heart swelled at the idea. "I'd love that. We can make it amazing." As they discussed the details, Veruca felt a newfound sense of purpose. The summer camp experience had transformed her in ways she never expected. Now, with supportive friends by her side and a fresh start at home, she was ready to embrace whatever came next. With laughter and plans filling the air, Veruca realized that her summer had ended, but her journey was just beginning. The bonds she had formed would guide her forward, and she was determined to make the most of every moment, with her friends right beside her. Extra reflections and new beginnings. As the weeks passed after the camp closure, Veruca found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. The experiences, both good and bad, had shaped her in ways she never imagined. She often chatted with Emily, Sophie, and Corley, solidifying their friendship through late-night phone calls and planning their reunion. One afternoon, while flipping through a scrapbook her mother had made of her summer, Veruca found a note from Emily tucked between the pages. It read, "Remember, it's okay to make mistakes. What matters is how you grow from them. Can't wait for our reunion." Reading those words made Veruca smile. She felt grateful for the lessons learned and the friends who had stood by her, even when things got tough. As the reunion date approached, Veruca and her friends planned an unforgettable day filled with games, laughter, and shared memories. They decided to host it at a local park, where they could celebrate their newfound friendships without the shadows of camp hanging over them. On the day of the reunion, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Campers from their group gathered, some sharing stories about their time at camp, others catching up on the new developments in their lives. Veruca took a moment to look around, feeling a warmth in her heart. She saw Emily, Sophie, and Corey laughing together, their friendship stronger than ever. She approached them, her smile brightening. "Here's to new beginnings." Veruca raised her drink in a toast. "To new beginnings," they echoed, clinking their cups together. As they celebrated, Veruca knew that while summer camp had come to an end, this chapter of her life was just the beginning of something wonderful. She was ready to face the future, surrounded by friends who truly understood her journey. To listen to more stories about Veruca Salt, visit ellisland890.com. Read and check out our entire library unlimited. No need to pay for anything. The whole library belongs to you and everything is free.